The gavel came down on $55. Dale Pruitt laughed first, and the room laughed because he did. $55 for a locker that don't even open, he said, loud enough for the back row. Wendell Coe did not answer him. He signed a receipt, folded it once, and put it in his shirt pocket. Locker 14 was 4 feet tall, 2 feet wide, painted the gray-green of every depot annex built after the war, the paint gone to rust freckles at the seams. Nobody else had noticed the second hasp, welded on below the first. The kind railroad men added themselves when a lock alone wasn't enough. Wendell had noticed it. He had welded hasps just like it, 30 years back, on boxcars nobody was supposed to open twice. It was March the 9th, 1988, in Miller's Fork, Rutledge County, Kentucky. 31 degrees at 9 in the morning, frost still white on the depot's north side, and 40-some people standing in a gravel lot waiting for a building to finish dying. Miller's Fork Union Depot had been closed to passengers since 1974. The storage annex behind it, a squat brick room where lost freight and forgotten baggage had sat for half a century, was being liquidated piece by piece before the county tore the whole thing down. Lockers, shelving, a dead switchboard, a safe nobody could crack, and Locker 14, jammed shut since nobody remembered when, sold to a 71-year-old man for the price of a tank of gas and a decent supper. Wendell Coe stood 5'9", bent forward slightly at the shoulders the way men get after 4 decades of leaning in a coupling pins. His hands were wide and scarred, 2 fingers on the left one that didn't straighten all the way anymore. He wore a canvas coat the color of an old dollar bill, patched twice at the left elbow with a different canvas that didn't match. His eyes were pale gray, the kind that don't need to widen to notice something. He had grease permanently worked into the creases of his knuckles. He did not react to Dale Pruitt's laugh. He picked up the locker, judged its weight, 61 pounds, he guessed later, and he wasn't often wrong about weight, and carried it to his truck without looking back at the crowd. Wendell had spent 38 years as a brakeman and yardman for the L&N line, coupling cars, reading hasps and locks that other men gave up on. He'd learned the trade from his Uncle Ott, who ran the yard at Bowling Green and used to say a lock wasn't a wall. It was a conversation, and you just had to speak its language. Wendell had spoken that language on 10,000 boxcars. His hands had the calluses to prove it, and his back had the ache. The railroad let him go in 1979 when diesel automation came through, same as it let go most men his age. He never stopped thinking like a yardman. He still woke at 5, still checked his porch latch twice before bed, still could tell a jammed mechanism from a rusted one just by the sound it made when you shook it. Nobody in 4 counties could read an old lock the way Wendell Coe could. Nobody asked him to anymore either. That didn't stop him showing up to depot auctions every spring, buying whatever nobody else wanted, because the wanting had never left him even after the work did. Dale Pruitt was 44 years old, built soft in the middle, the kind of man whose suit fit better standing still than moving. He wore a pressed navy blazer with a gold tie clip shaped like a train wheel, and he drove a new white Ford pickup he'd had detailed the morning of the auction. He'd been named interim station master 18 months back, mostly to manage the depot's closure and sale, and he treated the job like a stage. He called Wendell old-timer in front of the crowd, not unkindly exactly, just the way a loud man talks about anyone quieter than himself. "You'll need a torch and a prayer for that one," Pruitt said, and the crowd laughed the way a crowd does. Not because it was funny, but because he expected them to. To be fair to Pruitt, he wasn't a cruel man. He'd once let a laid-off porter keep his depot key as a keepsake, no charge. He was only ever wrong about this one thing, that a broken lock meant nothing worth finding. Now, if you have ever seen a man who knew exactly what he was doing get laughed out of a room by a man who did not, subscribe to this channel. Because the people who stay for stories like Wendell Coe's are exactly who Left Behind America was built for. The depot annex had gone up in 1946, built quick and cheap out of post-war brick to handle the flood of returning servicemen's freight and the baggage nobody came back to claim. Lockers like 14 were meant for short-term storage. 30 days, the sign used to say, though nobody ever enforced it. By the late 60s, half the lockers held things men never returned for because the men themselves never made it home to do the returning, or came home changed enough that they didn't want what waited. Wendell knew that history because he'd loaded freight through that same annex for years. He remembered March of 1969 specifically, because that was the same month his own brother shipped out to Da Nang. Records at the depot, before they were boxed up for auction, showed Locker 14 rented on March the 4th, 1969, to A.J. Talbot, no forwarding address given. Whoever Talbot was, he never came back for it. 19 years, almost to the week, the locker had sat sealed. Wendell had done the arithmetic in his head before he even lifted it into his truck bed. Wendell drove the 11 miles home at 31 miles an hour, slower than usual, because Locker 14 was strapped loose in the bed and he didn't trust the roads or his own truck springs. The temperature had climbed to 41 degrees by noon, and a thin sun sat behind gray cloud the whole way. Somewhere between the depot and his own gravel drive, word had already gotten to Miller's Fork about the $55 fool who bought a locker that didn't open. His neighbor, Ruth, hollered from her porch that he'd been swindled. She was wrong, though nobody knew that yet. He set the locker on 2 sawhorses in his garage, under a bare bulb hanging from a cord, and did what he always did before working a stubborn lock. He turned the radio off. He pulled his stool up close enough that his knees near touched the metal. He laid his tools out in a row on a folded towel, a flathead, a rubber mallet, a small tin of penetrating oil, and a pair of pliers worn smooth on the handles from decades of use. The first attempt told him nothing new. The hasp wouldn't give, rust having welded itself to rust over 19 winters. He worked oil into both hinges and the main mechanism, then sat back and let it work the way his uncle had taught him. "Well, doesn't hurry," I used to say. "You let it soak the way you'd let a stubborn man come around to sense on his own." 20 minutes passed while the oil worked. Wendell's hands ached in the cold garage air, arthritis settling into both wrists the way it did every winter now. He put his reading glasses on, though there was nothing yet to read, only because it was habit before close work. He thought, sitting there, about his brother, about a similar late afternoon in 1969 waiting on a letter that took 3 weeks to arrive and said almost nothing at all. He wondered, not for the first time, whether this locker was going to be another version of that same long wait for news that wouldn't come. He almost put the tools away and quit for the night. He didn't. The second attempt loosened the top hinge half an inch. Progress, but the main hasp held. He worked the mallet along the seam, careful taps, listening for the sound to change from a dead thud to something hollow, something giving. It took another 11 minutes before he heard it. The third attempt was the one that mattered. He braced the flathead against the last corner of rust, leaned his whole weight into it, and felt something let go deep inside the mechanism. The sound it made wasn't a bang. It was small, a single dry click, followed by a long, low groan of old hinges finally moving after 19 years of standing still. Cold air came out first, colder than the garage itself, and carrying a smell Wendell knew from 100 boxcars. Old paper gone soft with damp, a trace of leather, and underneath it something like a drugstore aftershave, faint as a whisper. He did not reach in. He sat back on his stool and looked into the dark for a long moment, the way a man looks into a well before deciding to lower a bucket. It was 6:17 in the evening when Locker 14 finally opened. 41 years old, that lock. 19 years since anyone last touched what was inside. Inside sat a suitcase, tin leather gone the color of weak coffee, corners worn pale, a single brass buckle still holding. It weighed perhaps 8 pounds, light for its size. Stitched faintly into the leather near the handle, worn almost past reading, were the initials JT. Wendell lifted it out and set it on the workbench first, letting it sit closed a moment before he touched the buckle. His hands trembled slightly working the old brass, not from the cold this time. Inside, laid on top, sat a small canvas bank envelope holding 6 savings bonds, each worth $100 at maturity, $600 total, untouched and legally owed to whoever came forward to claim them. Beneath the bonds lay a photograph, a young woman in a cotton dress standing by a fence post, squinting in a sun that had faded the print to sepia. Beneath that, folded in a bundle tied with what had once been a ribbon, sat 11 letters. None of them had been sent. Each one was addressed in the same steady hand to a Miss Alice Merritt. Route 2, Miller's Fork. Wendell untied the ribbon carefully and read the last letter first. Dated February the 28th, 1969, for days before Talbot rented the locker. He read it twice through, in full silence, the bare bulb humming faintly overhead. The line that stayed with him, the one he would repeat to no one but himself for the rest of that night, was this: I keep meaning to send these, and keep deciding they aren't good enough yet, and I'm starting to think nothing I write ever will be, so I'm saving them instead for when I can say it to your face. He did not cry. He sat very still for what felt to him like a long while, though his clock later showed it had been 11 minutes, and in that silence he heard only the garage heater ticking and, once, a dog barking somewhere down the road. He folded the letter back along its original crease, the way it had been folded for 19 years, and set it down gently on the bench. Then he wiped both hands on his trousers, stood up slowly, favoring the bad knee that always stiffened in cold weather, and went inside to make himself a cup of coffee before doing anything else at all. The next morning, Wendell drove the letters, the photograph, and the bonds to the county clerk's office himself. No ceremony, few words spoken. A record search took 4 days. J. Talbot, it turned out, had died in 1971, 2 years after leaving that locker sealed, in a highway accident 2 counties over. He had never married. Alice Merritt, though, was still living, 82 years old now, in a small house outside Bowling Green. A widow these 11 years, her late husband a man she had married in 1974 after 5 years of waiting on a letter that had, in fact, been written all along and simply never sent. Wendell delivered the bundle to her front porch himself. She read the last letter standing in her doorway, in full daylight, and said only he always did think too hard before he spoke. She insisted the $600 be split with the man who found it. Wendell refused it flatly. He said the letters weren't his to profit from, only his to carry the last short distance. He had never been offered money like that before, and would have been embarrassed by either accepting it or explaining why he wouldn't. Dale Pruitt heard about it 3 days later, secondhand, from the same neighbor who'd first told him about the sale. He said nothing about it publicly. Word in Miller's Fork was that his liquidation contract wasn't renewed that summer, the county citing a preference for someone with better judgment about what still had value. He left for a job 2 towns over that fall and hasn't run an auction in Rutledge County since. The depot annex came down in 1990, brick by brick, same as planned. But the County Historical Society kept one thing back before the wrecking ball came through. Locker 14 itself, hasp still hanging open, displayed now behind glass at the small county museum on Main Street. Children touch the glass, sometimes on school trips, and ask what it is. The docent tells them it's a suitcase that waited 19 years for somebody patient enough to open it right. Wendell Coe went back to his usual Tuesday routine the very next week. Same as always, spending his mornings fixing porch latches and stuck garage doors for neighbors who couldn't pay him much and didn't need to. He has a philosophy about it, one he learned from his uncle Lot and never had reason to doubt since. A lock is not a wall, he says. It is a conversation, and most people just never learn to wait long enough to hear the answer. So here's the question worth sitting with. A loud man in a pressed blazer looked at a broken lock and saw only $55 wasted. A quiet man in a patched canvas coat looked at the same lock and saw a conversation 19 years overdue. What would you have seen standing in that gravel lot in March of 1988? The broken thing everyone else saw, or the one still worth listening to?